The irony of my sermon title has not escaped me this week. The future's so bright, I gotta wear shades. It seems almost anathema to say that in a week when many feel that everything they feared has come to pass. It seems wrong to speak of a bright future when each day the news brings us word of someone else's rights taken away. It seems like I'm standing up here offering you some sort of alternative fact, right? I'm not supposed to do that as your minister. And I will be the last one to claim that I am feeling any optimism at all in this moment. Quite the contrary, in fact. The reality of this moment has felt awfully heavy this week. I found myself wanting at times to just shut it all out. As the news rolled in of new restrictions on abortion and immigration, orders targeting Muslims, Native Americans, people with disabilities, and that silencing of the media and our federal agencies, I wanted desperately to shut it all out. I wanted to retreat into my little bubble of privilege and leave it to the powers that be to do what they will with our world. Did you feel any of that this week? Yeah. But there was this little voice in my head that reminded me that actually I had a sermon to write for Sunday, and most importantly, that I would not be living into my Unitarian Universalist faith if I gave in to that despair. I would not be living into my Unitarian Universalist faith if I chose to silently accept this assault on marginalized people all across our country. Now, in our recent history, there have been times when Unitarian Universalism has been an overly optimistic faith. In the heyday of humanism, we often said that we believed in the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. Now, that's not an entirely false proposition, but perhaps it's not as honest as we should be about our failings as human beings. These two phrases, the future's so bright, I gotta wear shades, and the progress of mankind, onward and upward forever, are false. I'm gonna say that quite blatantly. After the week we've had, I don't think anyone would deny that. But perhaps in the right context, there is something useful about making such bold claims. People often talk about self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, I've always understood this to mean the things that you think or say enough that they come true. Not necessarily because they were inevitably going to become true, but because you thought or said them enough to make them come true. Do you follow me there? That was a complicated sentence. I've also always understood this to be something negative. For example, if you think that you aren't good enough for a certain job and you have that thought in your head as you go to interview for that job, that if that thought is so pervasive that it takes over your brain and your heart, it may be that you'll actually not perform as well as you're able. You may not get the job simply because you get overwhelmed by the thought that you can't do it. If we treat a situation as if it is going to end up in a certain way, it may well end up that way. So this rhetoric around self-fulfilling prophecies is all negative. If you think that bad thing, you will make it so. But I wonder what it would look like if we turn that idea on its head. What about the positive side of self-fulfilling prophecies? Does the same theory work for the good things we think and talk about? It's almost that notion of fake it till you make it. If you smile enough, it actually does, science tells us, send endorphins to your brain that make you happier. But I think it might be deeper than that as well. It's not just about fake it till you make it. I wonder if the positive side of self-fulfilling prophecies is about envisioning a future that is better than the present, envisioning that future that we dream about. It's not the envisioning necessarily that makes it real, but the fact that we have something then to work towards. We cannot begin to build a better world unless we have a sense of what that better world might look like, right? We need concrete visions of what it is that we are working towards. We need to make bold claims about what the future should look like if we are going to have any chance at all of getting there. Last weekend, a whole bunch of us participated in marches in Boston and Concord and Washington, D.C. How many of you were there? Can you? Oh my gosh. Yeah, you were there. So these marches were not perfect. And there are always critiques to be made, but they were certainly powerful. Tristan and I were in D.C., and when we got off the metro on Saturday morning, 4 stops early and 3/4 of a mile from the march, we were immediately engulfed into a steady stream of pink hats and homemade signs. Now, I was determined to find the UU convergence, so we set off towards the meeting point, but well before we could even get to the official march route, we were halted by the sheer mass of people. I swear at one point there were so many people around me that they were elevating the temperature of the air. Kathy's nodding. It's true. We covered a lot of ground that day, but we never found either the beginning or the end of that crowd. And there were all kinds of people in that crowd. At one point, we were marching with the Plumbers Union. At another point, we passed a crowd from Veterans for Peace. There were signs about every issue under the sun. A Black Lives Matter sign next to a rainbow flag. Signs about immigrants' rights, reproductive rights, and workers' rights. And some signs that simply said, literally everything about this is so awful that I have no idea where to start. There were career activists. There were folks who haven't been to a march since the Vietnam War, and plenty of folks for whom this was their first protest ever. I saw all ages, races, classes, and genders represented. Now, I'll admit that I was skeptical about this women's march. With all the critiques of white feminism that preceded the march, and all of my own feelings about what does or does not feel useful in bringing about change, I wasn't 100% sure that this was a place that I should be putting my energy. But as I looked around at the diversity of that crowd, and felt the fierce love and commitment emanating from those hundreds of thousands of bodies, I thought, maybe this is what the revolution looks like. Maybe this convergence of different people and different issues is a part of what it takes to build that vision that will guide us forward. And I felt hope. Not optimism. I'm not so sure that our future is bright. But we have power greater than we know. That march was supposed to be on one street. Do you know how many streets it was on? I have no idea, because I couldn't find the end of it. It was not on one street. We have power. And we have hope. Hope that can be found in the building of communities of resistance that envision that future that love and justice demand. For in envisioning that future together, we do begin to make it so. By imagining that world that we dream of, we open up the possibility for that dream to become reality. In that way, maybe the positive side of self-fulfilling prophecies is most aptly manifested in hope. My favorite definition of hope comes from author Rebecca Solnit, who writes, "Hope is not a lottery ticket that you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. It is an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. To hope," she says, "is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable." Our hope, our axe, is a vision of the future that looks radically different from the reality of this moment. It is a vision of the future that may well be so bright, you gotta wear shades. It is a vision of the beloved community where all are loved, all are worthy, all are cared for. And it is our commitment to that vision that makes this present moment inhabitable. It is our commitment to that vision that begins to make it so. Now, one of the pieces of that vision that we've been highlighting in this congregation over the past few weeks is the statement, "Black Lives Matter." You may not have been thinking of this as a vision statement, but I believe it is. The reasoning behind the slogan, "Black Lives Matter," is that we live in a world where time and time again it is shown that in our society, Black lives don't matter as much as white lives. And yet, we want to live in a society where Black lives matter, right? Now, sometimes people worry that Black Lives Matter has an implicit only in front of it, that this is somehow a narrow cause. But what it is important to understand is that what this phrase actually has is an implicit "to" at the end. That's T-O-O. Black Lives Matter too. The phrase envisions a world that is different from our current reality. By hanging this banner, we are saying we envision a world where Black Lives Matter too. We know that this is not the world that we live in now, and we want to be a part of making that vision a reality. As Unitarian Universalists, we are familiar with envisioning a better reality than the one that we currently occupy. This is, after all, the goal of our 7 principles. We commit to affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person because we want to live in a world where every person, including everyone, including our governments, affirms and promotes the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Black Lives Matter is actually an extension of that first principle. As Kenny Wiley writes in his UU Theology of Black Lives Matter, to fight for Black lives now is to participate in radical hope. It is to battle for salvation on this earth. It is to fight for life, for love, for justice. It is to demand more out of that first principle. It is to demand a more perfect faith. If there were ever a time to demand more out of our faith and our principles, now is that time. Now is the time, as Reverend Meg Riley says, to cast our vision around the corner into an unknown future. Now is the time to make this present moment inhabitable by committing ourselves to that future, to a future that is more just, more loving, more peaceful than our current reality. Now is the time to make bold statements about the future that we want to see, to claim that prophetic voice of our faith. Now is the time to let hope shove us out the door, because it will take everything we have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. Arundhati Roy says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." I could hear her breathing at the march last week, loud and proud. I can hear her breathing in this room, in each of your hearts. Now is the time, and these are our people. The beginning is near. Let's seize the day.